God's love, elevating, energizing, empowering. Miracles happen when you know that you are loved. Peter Youngren has communicated God's love with millions from every religion and culture. Get ready for your ultimate life because you are loved.
Welcome to our telecast today. This will be a very special half hour together. My guest today is one of the candidates for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. And I'm going to introduce him to you in just a moment. And I think you're going to find this conversation very interesting. And we're going to meet a politician who speaks today maybe in terms and with a boldness that we are not accustomed to in this country. But let me say, first of all, we respect the Canadian policy of charities not endorsing any candidate, and we don't endorse any political party or any candidate. But I want to remind you that we have had members of the New Democratic Party, members of the Liberal Party, and members of the Conservative Party. We have not had members of the Bloc Québécois, but we would, of course, be open to that as well. And we do believe that Christian views, Christian thought influences public life. And you may recall, those who follow our program, that on the 1 or 2 Sundays before the last federal election, I preached a message on this, and I pointed out that from the scripture, the government's purpose is to resist evil and to do good and to collect taxes for the same, to promote peaceful society and an openness where there's freedom of religion, and for us that's the gospel being shared. And so that's the basis how we look at public life and politics, and we believe that the word of Christ is applicable in all spheres of life. So with all that, welcome to Derek Sloan.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and you come from Hastings, Lennox, Addington. That's quite a mouthful.
That's right. That's
and
right.
Where is that?
Well, that's the name of my riding, and very few people even know the name of their own riding, wherever they are. But it encompasses Belleville. It stretches up to almost Algonquin Park, and it touches the border of Kingston. So that's roughly the area, and I live in the country just north of Belleville.
Yes, and so you're a first-time member of Parliament.
That's correct.
So let's get right into it. We have a lot to talk about. And
Sure.
So first, a little bit more about your background. I know you're a lawyer, you're a husband, you're a father,
Yes.
and of course, a member of Parliament. We shared that already. So
That's
a little
right.
bit more you can tell us about your background.
Sure. Well, I'm a former small business owner as well, and I became concerned. It took me about a decade. I never intended to be involved in politics, but over a period of a decade of seeing the ways in which government was encroaching on individual liberties, freedom of conscience, religious liberty, I decided to go to law school. I have some good friends who are, like Barry Bussey, for example, is a close friend of mine. He works with the 4Cs. So I know the people who fight for religious liberty in Canada. I thought maybe I would be doing that too. And I felt called to enter politics instead. I was involved briefly with the Trinity Western University case in 2015.
Yeah.
And I learned fairly quickly that even if you have the best lawyers, the best legal scholarship, and even common sense on your side, that's not enough necessarily. And I felt that I would be better used in politics. And so I'm here today.
That Trinity case, of course, would be worth several programs just to discuss that, but that's
right.
not the issue of the day. Now, I know, as I think all the candidates for the party leadership will consider themselves to be Christian. I don't know that for sure, but
I believe so.
would think
I
so.
believe so, yes.
And you have the Christian faith, and so what does that mean to you, not only personally, but also in your work?
Yeah, well, I'm a Christian. I'm born and raised a Seventh-day Adventist. I consider myself a born-again Christian. I had a conversion experience in my late teens where God became real to me, and it's the most important thing in my life. I judge what I do, and I wish we all lived in a way where we felt that we would have to give account to God for the way that we've lived our life. And I live my life in a way that whether people are watching or not, I know that God is watching, and I try to live in a way that honors God. So if we all live that way, I think society would be a better place. But I believe that whoever you are, whether you're Christian or not, you have values, you have ideas about the way that life should work, you have ideas about the value of human life. And I believe that those who have faith in God place a higher dignity on human life. And so I care about life, whether it's babies in the womb, whether it's people who are living, and have issues in life, or people at the end of life. I care about all of that, and those are very important issues to me.
Well, I would say, preach it, brother, but this is not a church service.
That's
but,
right.
And,
Yes.
and of course, many people of other faith, including Muslims, etc., they have great moral values as well that they aspire to. So I think we are an all-inclusive society. But let me say, I know that you're unashamedly a social conservative.
That's correct.
And that phrase has sometimes been used in a negative way. And I won't quote any of your fellow contenders or candidates for this, but in the leadership debate, getting right to the issue of pro-life and abortion, you said, and I quote, "It's not right that Canada doesn't have any laws when it comes to abortion. It's out of whack with most of the developed world." So in light of that, how would you open the discussion about abortion, since this topic has not really been addressed by a leader in any great way since 30 years ago, maybe or so?
Well, most people don't know that, and most people don't realize that we don't have any laws in Canada relating to abortion. It's actually really unusual. And when you talk to most people on the street, they're completely unaware. So simply bringing that up is a great way to start. And you're right, most politicians have kicked the can down the road and they've been too afraid to touch it. But I firmly believe that we can gain ground on this issue. And most people, when they understand the facts, they're like, yeah, that seems kind of weird. Even people that consider themselves pro-choice think it's weird that we don't have any laws whatsoever.
Yeah, no, and many people, as you say, do not know this. Anecdotally, I spoke with someone who I think is sympathetic to your views, and the person said, well, we're not as bad as the UK or Germany. I said, yeah, actually, we're worse. People don't know that. Now, you have a 12-point plan on your website. People can find it.
do.
Your website is there, by the way. We won't even give it. It'll be there throughout the program. A 12-point plan regarding how you would deal with the abortion issue.
That's correct. That's correct. So, I mean, part of it, and people can look at my plan, part of it deals with restricting abortion, for example, sex-selective abortions where people choose to abort based on the gender, and it typically is girls that are aborted, not boys. So that's something I would deal with, but I also deal with adoption. I deal with providing ultrasounds prior to abortions. I deal with foreign funding of abortion. I deal with funding radical left-wing groups in Canada that promote abortion. So I deal with many aspects of it. The most important thing is to just get the conversation going because I have yet to meet someone in real life who wants anything more than a very limited scope for abortion. So even people who say they're pro-abortion or pro-choice, when you actually talk about what they're comfortable with, it's actually a very limited view. And what the liberals and others are pushing is a very radical view. Mm-hmm. So I believe the bulk of Canadians would certainly favor much greater restrictions than we currently see.
Yeah, and I think Canadians would be almost, they would hardly believe it that we are similar to countries like Cuba and North Korea and China rather than similar to Germany and the Netherlands, etc.
That's right.
People will be shocked at that, but nobody wants to talk about it. So thank you for bringing that up. This is very close to our heart as Christians.
Yes.
And something we address in church. I address it from time to time. And so to see a politician like you addressing it, it means a lot to us as believers.
Yes.
So I say thank you for that. Now, in the terrible killing spree in Nova Scotia here 3 months ago in April, one of the victims was a pregnant mother, and yet the baby wasn't even accounted as a victim. How would you address that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I saw some news reports early on that said there was a death count of 23, and then immediately it was revised to 22. And the reason why is because the 23rd was the baby that died. So I have a law that I would bring forward. There's been people who've been tried to pass it before, called Cassie and Molly's law, and basically it deals with the fact that when violence is inflicted on women who are pregnant and the fetus is targeted, often there's no additional punishment. The unborn baby has no status in Canadian law, and it leads us to some weird situations. So the Cassie and Molly's law says, you know, if you kill a mother who's pregnant and the baby dies as well, you've committed 2 murders, not just one. Mm-hmm. And when you inflict violence on the fetus, that is inflicting violence on a person. So that's something that I believe, 99% of Canadians would support.
Absolutely. Now, I'm old enough to still remember the 1988 debate in Parliament. And so let me ask you this. This is maybe a tough question, and it's hard now. I know I think it was Otto von Bismarck who said that politics is the art of the possible, while in church we deal with more absolutes, you know. And so what if you got a majority, but not the entire 12-point plan, but a number of points in that plan would be accepted? Would you go along with that and see that as an incremental step? Or because in 1988, I have a feeling that people were so entrenched in their positions that nothing came out of it, and we live with that ever since.
Yeah, so every point in my plan is acceptable as a standalone thing. So if only 6 of the 12 points was enacted, each of those standalone points is an appropriate point that I would be satisfied with. So it's not, it wouldn't be a compromise. It would just mean that we would be happy for that, and we would continue the conversation and see what else we could accomplish.
I think that's very wise. And by the way, let me say to you at home that if you go to the website, you see Derek Sloan's website there, you can have it. I have it actually downloaded here, the whole thing. And I was reading through it before our interview today. So go there and check that out and see how you think of those points. And I think it's great work that you've done to put forth a plan like that. And this idea that each point is a standalone, it's a great thing, because some of the points I think would be so easy to gain a majority of Canadians. All right, let's switch. We're moving along here. You told Power Play host Evan Solomon that you would not have voted for Bill C-16, which enshrined the rights of transgender people into law in 2016. Now, you were criticized, not surprisingly, from many angles and sources, but you were also criticized, I believe, at least by one member of the Conservative caucus, maybe more. So could you explain that, open up that whole issue of Bill C-16?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there is and remain protections in provincial human rights codes for transgender people. This particular law was the law that Jordan Peterson became famous over his opposition to. So it has free speech implications. It very likely could force somebody to use a gender pronoun that they don't even maybe know. I mean, right now there's potentially 70 or more different gender combination pronouns that people use. This bill could potentially force you on pain of maybe a fine, or if you refuse to pay that, potentially imprisonment, to use a particular gender pronoun. I mean, this is George Orwell stuff. This is not something that we should see in Canada. More pointedly, Bill C-16 does things like allow men who identify as women to use women's bathrooms and change rooms. And we see in some of the major gyms, like workout facilities in the country, they're allowing this to happen. And this could be a man that looks exactly like you and I who decides that they are a woman. And so a lot of women feel uncomfortable with this. We're having issues with male prisoners requesting transfer to female prisons. Up to 50% of these men, I've seen stats, are in jail for sexual assault to begin with. So we're just seeing an erosion of women's safe spaces. We're seeing an erosion. There's many feminist groups who consider themselves left-wing and pro-abortion that are supporting me because they feel that this bill is eroding what it means to be a woman. They've spent years fighting for sex-based rights, and this bill is basically saying, well, anybody can be a woman. You could be a woman, I could be a woman, if you decide you're a woman, you're a woman. And these groups are saying, no, being a woman is more than just deciding that you're a woman. There's more to it than that. So these are some of the issues with this bill. And, you know, I have nothing against transgender people. I wish them all the best, but I don't believe that, you know, when we're doing things like giving them access to women's bathrooms. And it also opens the opportunity for someone who is not transgender, but is using those loopholes from a predatory point of view to have access to women's safe spaces. So there's a lot of issues with it.
Well, I can relate as a pastor here of the Toronto Celebration Church. We have transgender people attend. Some of them exactly have really been helpful to us, very good people. It's not about whether you approve of people in that sense or not. It's about the law here. But let me ask you, as a federal politician, and maybe you can educate me and others, I have a feeling a lot of this is under provincial law. But what can the federal government do to influence and kind of give leadership to the provinces?
Yeah, I think that there's a big opportunity for the government to make sure that, for example, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is followed. And we have very strict protections for freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. And these are things that the federal government needs to take very seriously. in their mandate. And when provinces don't protect those rights, the federal government needs to be sure that they're protected.
And I'm going to get right ahead here and see how much time we have left, and we still got some minutes together. So Bill C-8, you know, I never memorized. You're in the field of politics, right. So you memorize Bill C and so and so and so. I have to look at my notes. Which one am I talking about? Bill C-8, the criminal code ban on conversion therapy. Now, the matter of conversion therapy is something that strikes really close to home for anyone in Christian ministry. I suppose other religions, it applies to them as well. And the idea is any advice given by a member of the clergy or of a religious order to someone who might be inquiring and saying, I have issues, I'm questioning my sexual identity, and they might say, what are your thoughts? What does the Bible say on this? What does the church or whatever religion they're representing? Now, you said you referred to this bill as child abuse, and naturally you had some people who didn't like that comment, so I'll let you go ahead and explain.
Well, I usually point out the fact, now there's a lot of issues with this bill, the way it's so broadly drafted. The Liberals will say that it wouldn't impact what you just said, but I think it certainly opens the door for exactly what you just said. The issue that I take with it that I think makes it most cogent for people is the issue with transgender identifying youth. So youth with gender dysphoria, they're born as a girl or a boy, but they think that they might be the other gender. So we're seeing a massive increase in the amounts of kids who are presenting with gender dysphoria. We also know that over 80% of these kids, studies have shown over 80% of these kids will grow out of this. So by the time they become an adult, they say, hey, I'm actually happy with the body I'm born with. So what this bill does is it says that as a parent, you cannot get your child gender affirming counseling. So you couldn't take your child to a counselor that would say, hey, Billy, you actually, you are a boy and we're going to help you work through these body issues. That would potentially be illegal with a 5-year prison sentence for the parent and the therapist. But if you want to take Billy and get him on irreversible medical drugs, puberty blockers, get him surgery to cut off healthy body parts to make him, look not like a boy or, whatever, that's perfectly legal. And so I've said, look, we need to do the opposite. We need to ban sex change operations for anybody under 18, which is what they've done in the UK. And we need to make, body affirming counseling entirely legal. I mean, when we know that 4 out of 5 kids will grow out of this, we're rolling the dice. If we're operating on them, rendering them, sterile for the rest of their life, changing who they are, this is not the type of thing that we need to be doing with kids. We need to protect our kids.
And imagine the potential lawsuits. I mean, we also are receiving reports of people who did have gender-altering surgery, and then later on they regret it. I mean, the potential lawsuit against health ministers, against the government, I don't know who you would sue for that.
There's a big detransitioning movement right now. We're on the cusp of that. There's going to be huge lawsuits, I'm confident.
Just one related question here. A couple of years ago, there was a directive from the government, and I may not quote it exactly word for word, but and it applied to us here in many churches and religious organizations, that we were providing jobs for students in the summer, and there was a grant to pay a good portion of what we paid the students. But then there was this directive that we had to be in agreement with the government's policies. I believe the issues were relating to abortion, gender issues. This felt very violating, I would say, for us. And we stopped. We didn't employ as many students, so it affected people. Your thoughts on that very quickly before we go to the next issue.
So the Canada Summer Jobs Grant was a major issue, and many people were affected, some Christian, some otherwise. And you're right, you had to check off to say that you agree with the government's definition of reproductive rights, including abortion. This is an example of the government coming after those who don't agree with the very latest and greatest politically correct views that they have. It's something I'm totally against, and you're right, that's a major issue.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, for us, then there was someone who gave a speech and said, oh, just check the box anyhow, but there's no way we were going to do that in our organization. We're not going to, the government grant wasn't that paramount to our well-being, but we would have appreciated it though. Now, let me go on here. We want to hit another area that is of great concern to me, freedom of speech. And I believe this is from your either your website. Well, I'm going to quote from you: "The damage to free speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of conscience happening in Canada cannot be understated." I think that was a direct quote from your website or from your program. And what religious freedoms, and you touched on some of them, but just maybe list them again, do you see are threatened? And what particularly must we do and can we do to protect our freedoms?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is Christians should be involved. They should be active. They should understand that we're living in perilous times where the government can and will do things like the summer jobs grant. I also believe that the time is coming fairly soon, unless we see a change, where charitable status will be dependent on having the right beliefs, whatever beliefs the government says are the right beliefs. So we saw with Trinity Western University, a private university that wasn't receiving any public funds whatsoever, wasn't even allowed to open a law school, even though they had gone through the exact same case 15 years prior with their teachers' college and had won at the Supreme Court. So we're seeing targeting people who hold views that are viewed as outdated or wrong, and I believe that that's a major issue. In terms of free speech, we're seeing on our universities major issues with what I call cancel culture, which is just preventing normal people with normal views from showing up and talking about them. If you're not super left-wing or super progressive, there's a cancel culture that's directed against you, and I believe that's wrong.
I mentioned to you just before we got on the set here that in our case, just before the last federal election, we released a little 3-4 minute clip on Facebook where basically I talked about Canada's laws or lack thereof regarding abortion. And I also talked about how science now, in a study in 2005, that 90% of babies born at the end of the second trimester have a viable life. And that we ought to, if we don't want to wave the Bible around, and I'm not advocating that politicians should do that, we can at least follow science. Well, that was taking off of Facebook. And it just kind of hit home to us. And then after the election, it was approved, but it was kind of, we wanted to make a little statement. And so this hits very close to home. And I would say many churches are concerned about this. For the first time in our history as a church, I brought it up to our board of directors and brought some information in a recent board meeting. So thank you for taking a stand on this. I think it means a lot to Christians. Now, quickly, we have lots of topics to cover here, and I see not so many minutes to do with it. But I've purposely not, you have a great economic plan. I've heard your thoughts on economics. I've stayed away from that because we are a Christian organization. This is a Christian program. And I think many other religious groups would identify with the questions I've asked. So I focus on that area. Now, regarding here, I will say you also quote either from the leadership debate or from your platform. Here it is. Mm-hmm. We cannot afford to do this every 2 years, referring to the COVID-19. When another virus comes in from China or wherever else it's going to come from, we can't afford this again. So what steps would you take to prepare Canada or to prevent a pandemic or to prepare Canada for a global crisis?
Well, it goes back to the fact that we're living in a very politically correct time, and there's real people out there who are questioning the way that we've handled the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to make sure that we live in a country where you can criticize the government and it's taken seriously. And some of the things that I have an issue with, obviously, we didn't do travel bans early enough. We believed, that wearing masks would not be helpful. We believed that travel bans were racist. We believed that the virus was not transmissible from asymptomatic people, all of which turned out to be false. So, that's part of it is make sure that we listen to countries like Taiwan, who were very early on raising the alarm bell, and China was actively covering up what was going on, and we listened ultimately to China instead of other countries. But we also have to make sure that we're doing this the right way. And a complete and total shutdown of the economy, in my view, was unwarranted. COVID-19 was very dangerous for certain segments of the population, but even the testing we were doing, and there's some very smart people from Stanford University and others that have been pointing out the testing that we're doing isn't telling us much because we're testing only the sickest of the sick, and then we were extrapolating a death rate from that. Right. So if you're only testing the sickest of the sick and 3% of them end up dying, that doesn't mean 3% of the entire population is going to die. And so there's different ways to get a better idea of who has actually been hit by the virus and what the death rate would be across the broad spectrum of the population. And the difference between a 3% death rate and a 0.3% death rate is huge when it comes to, do we shut the entire economy down or do we do more targeted measures? So these are the types of things that we have to look at. There's a lot of smart people out there, but I feel our approach has been, well, can't question anything. Whatever the government says, we have to do. Well, we have to use our heads. We have to be willing to question things, and that's the type of leadership I propose.
Now, I know you took a lot of heat when you called for the resignation or firing, whatever, of our chief health officer, or I believe it's her term, Dr. Tam.
Yes.
And I feel, if we throw the term racist around too much, then it becomes meaningless.
That's correct.
If everything is racist, we just use it as a term. And so
yes.
I don't think you were for a moment discussing her background or ethnicity, but just comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, well, I certainly didn't mention her background at all, and I would have made the same comment regardless of where she's from. And in fact, she's from Hong Kong, not China. But so, I mean, Dr. Tam waited until very late in the game to even be concerned about the coronavirus. She was saying, we don't need to do these travel bans. Masks are unnecessary. There's no asymptomatic transmission. And then, almost overnight, this was well into March. We hadn't done anything. Almost overnight, COVID went from being, not an issue to the worst disease in the world, and we need to shut down forever until there's a vaccine. So, we saw how they just switched views. I mean, we went from accusing people who were suggesting, self-quarantining for people who are coming from China. They were accused of being racist. There was a group in Markham of Chinese Canadians who were saying, hey, after Chinese New Year, you guys need to watch here in Markham to let these kids come back to school, because it could increase, they're coming from China, it could increase the transmission of COVID. This Chinese Canadian group was called racist. So we're using racism as a cover for.
I got to stop you there.
Oh, of course, I'm sorry.
They see where the clock is at. So that's a whole other area. I was going to ask you about Hong Kong and how we in Canada deal with the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, I'm also concerned for many Christians. I have many Christian friends in Hong Kong. We've been to Hong Kong, done ministry there. But we don't have time for that, so there's much more. I encourage you, this has been a very different program, and please go to Derek Sloan's website, find out much more, and I hope that you hear my thought, and the idea behind this program is that the Christian thought, our belief systems, affect every area of life, including politics. So I thank you for watching, and I thank you, Derek Sloan, and I wish you all the best, and we'll see what happens when you come to the actual convention and the vote. So God bless you. And God bless you. Thank you. And remember, you are loved.
Thank you. Your participation makes this global gospel ministry possible. To share your prayer request or to help bring the gospel to those who have never heard it, call 416-745-1820. You can give at www.peteryoungren.org or send your gift to World Impact Ministries at P.O. Box 62039 RPO Victoria Terrace, North York, Ontario, M4A 2W1, or P.O. Box 433 Winchester, Kentucky 40392-9800. Together, let's give everyone a chance to know God's love in Jesus Christ.